Hi, welcome to IndyCar on the 14th of March. Now, you'll find me back again here on Facebook just for the time being doing live streams for a number of technical reasons. As you know, Facebook has pretty much nobbled almost every political blogger on the channels these days. So I'm making this video primarily to make it easier for you guys to find me. So hopefully those of you who are able to watch me live at the moment will be able to share this video a little bit later on. Anyway, a couple of things today that cropped up, interesting pieces of news I think that many of us might have suspected, but we're never actually sure about. And the first story involves Mark Drakeford, who is the leader of the Welsh Senate. He's basically the First Minister of Wales, and he was giving evidence in the COVID inquiry about Nicola Sturgeon. Now, Mark Drakeford obviously has really not got any great iron on the fire, so whatever he said here is obviously his own opinion. But what he said that was interesting, I think, was the fact that he judged that UK politicians, and by that he meant English politicians, MPs for example, were afraid of Nicola Sturgeon. Now, they feared her not because she was scary, not because she was threatening them in any way at all, but simply because she was such a formidable politician, and her command of the facts and her ability to conduct a debate in a combative way made it impossible for many English MPs and MSPs to face up to her and actually have any kind of confrontational dialogue at all, because they knew that they were unlikely to win any such encounter. This is an interesting observation, that English MPs were afraid of Nicola Sturgeon. They were afraid of her as a politician, not a person. But Mark Drakeford's comments in the context of the COVID inquiry really shine a light on why things happened the way they did with COVID, why Nicola Sturgeon's approach was markedly different, why she appeared more frequently before the television cameras each day to give updates on what was happening with COVID, and also the clear instructions and the clear advice that was given to the people during the lockdown, contrasted starkly with Boris Johnson, who, according to Mark Drakeford, behaved like an absent football manager who simply would only appear in front of the television cameras when he was forced to by circumstances. And apparently even the Prime Minister was scared to be compared to Nicola Sturgeon, lest he be assumed to be of equal status even. So, out of his own ego, I suspect, and his fear of being shown up by, first of all, a woman, a Scottish woman, and a Scottish woman who was his equal at the least, and probably far superior in terms of political acumen, he was scared as well to be compared with her. And not only scared to be compared with her, but also scared to be compared with the other leaders of both Wales and Northern Ireland. So Boris Johnson was basically a big fearty. He was scared to be compared to other political leaders from the Celtic nations. And that, I think, really explains why the Scottish approach to the COVID lockdown was so markedly different in terms of experience. Now remember that the actions taken by the Scottish government largely followed the direction of the British restrictions. There wasn't a great deal of difference. Maybe some of the timing of some of the restrictions was different, but certainly the information coming from Nicola Sturgeon and the Scottish team was very much clearer, made more regularly and more forcefully, and people understood it. Whereas Boris Johnson's waffling and evasions, and the fact that he refused to wear a mask himself, even though he was demanding that other people do it, is really the reason why Nicola Sturgeon stood out from the rest of the pack during the COVID pandemic. Not because her government was doing anything particularly different in terms of the actions to do with COVID, but simply because the approach of the Scottish government and the approach of Nicola Sturgeon was to keep people informed on a regular basis with clear, precise information on the levels of the disease, how it was progressing through the population, why it was important to follow the procedures laid down in the lockdown and in other subsequent easing of the restrictions, the wearing of masks and so on. So Drakeford's comments in the COVID inquiry are illuminating, and I think they shine a light on why it felt so different in Scotland from the way it felt in England during the COVID lockdowns, and the way the two political leaders operated. Boris Johnson trying his best not to introduce restrictions unless he was forced to do so. Nicola Sturgeon taking the advice of her medical advisors and making those decisions quickly and articulating them clearly to the population. So Nicola Sturgeon was, and probably still is, a formidable politician. It's a great shame that she resigned. It's an enormous shame, because had she stuck around and had she forcefully carried out what she said she was going to do in 2018, which was to hold an independence referendum if Scotland was taken out of the EU, had she done that, then we would be in a very different situation from the one we're in today. We could have been looking at proceeding to independence right now, because I'm pretty certain the referendum would have been won. And all the polling that's currently being done at the moment seems to suggest that the support for independence is even higher than it was back in 2018. It's higher than it was during COVID. It's higher than it was even a year ago. We're now looking at 56% of the population wanting independence, not just wanting a referendum, although the demand for that will come. Anyway, that's not the only thing that happened, obviously. The Tory party's MSP, Stephen Kerr, has been criticised recently for remarks he made concerning Humza Yousaf. And Humza Yousaf's alleged connections, and I'm using the term in inverted commas here, between Mr. Yousaf's in-laws, who lived and actually almost got stuck and killed in Gaza. And this connection, the insinuation made by Mr. Kerr, was that money which was given by the Scottish Government in good faith to the United Nations Relief Agency, or UNRWA as it's known. Now, the UNRWA is an emergency relief organisation. It exists to provide instant relief where it's needed in war zones and disaster zones. The Scottish Government made that donation, I think it was £250 million, before there was any question about whether anyone in UNRWA in Gaza had been involved in any way with Hamas. So Stephen Kerr's insinuation is that Mr. Yousaf's decision to give this donation, this £250 million to UNRWA, was connected with his family in Gaza in some way or other. And the clear insinuation, the innuendo, the implication made by Mr. Kerr's remarks was that there was some link, a tenuous link, but there was some link between Humza Yousaf and Hamas because of what happened after Scotland had made the donation, when UNRWA was accused by Israel of having several workers on their payroll who were either related to Hamas fighters or were in some way actively assisting Hamas. Now, I cannot see any evidence, I have not heard any evidence to support this claim by Israel that there were people from Hamas working in UNRWA, and there has been no news about it. In fact, the mainstream media has gone very, very quiet about whether there was any connection at all. And yet Stephen Kerr is making political capital out of a disaster, out of a humanitarian catastrophe, a genocide effectively happening in Gaza right now. And the British government, the American government are saying nothing about Israel ending its attacks in Gaza and allowing the people who live there, who are non-combatants, who are basically just families who are trying to survive, to get the absolutely essential food and supplies and medical supplies that they so desperately need before they starve to death. So Stephen Kerr, I think, is verging on being racist. He's refusing to retract his statement. He knew that this smear would affect the popularity and it would affect the way people regard Mr. Yousaf, whether or not we agree or disagree with Mr. Yousaf's political affiliations and these opinions is largely irrelevant here. The fact is that the British state, having smeared Nicola Sturgeon by holding a 2-year-long police inquiry into a £600,000 donation, which appears to have been spent on the political campaign it was intended to, and some kind of camper van which was donated by an independence supporter, which has not been used. And the police have spent 2 years investigating all this and have come up with absolutely zero. So the smear attempt on Nicola Sturgeon on the SNP obviously wasn't enough for the Tories. They have to go after Humza Yousaf now to try to claim that just because he's a Muslim, he's somehow connected with Hamas in Gaza and he's a bad guy. And this comes hot on the heels of Michael Gove's latest attempt to try to redefine what extremism is in the United Kingdom, so that they can ban organisations which they think are going to destabilise, undermine or tear the United Kingdom apart. Now these are the words that they use. Now when you think about the words that are being used by people like Gove, tearing the UK apart could easily be applied to the Scottish Independence Campaign, because the Scottish Independence Campaign, if it's successful and we get a referendum and we vote to leave the UK, would not exactly tear the Union apart, but would certainly separate it into its component parts. And if that is extremism, then people like yourself and myself who want independence and will peacefully campaign for it could be labelled as extremists. The government has been very reluctant so far to release a list of organisations that it plans to label as extremist. And those organisations are expected to be limited. Public funding will be cut to them. They will be observed, they will be surveilled by the United Kingdom's security services. They'll gather intelligence from inside organisations they label as extremist. Now, I've already said on a few occasions that I believe the SNP was infiltrated decades ago by United Kingdom spooks who've been operating inside there for years and passing information to the United Kingdom security services about what the SNP was planning to do, and how mysteriously it was that Nicola Sturgeon very quickly abandoned all attempts to hold a referendum and kicked the ball basically over to the Union side and allowed the United Kingdom's Supreme Court to rule that Scotland's Parliament was not competent to hold a referendum. But having resigned after that, and Nicola Sturgeon now having sort of taken a back seat, Humza Yousaf is now the man with the target on his back. And he is now being vilified by people like Stephen Kerr, who is, you know, even putting the best possible spin on it, a loathsome man. I mean, he's ambitious to become an MP. He wants to be selected as an MP for Westminster. Well, frankly, if he does get in to Westminster as an MP, he will be no loss to Scotland. In fact, the more time he spends in London, the better, as far as most of us are concerned. Humza Yousaf, on the other hand, I'm not sure about. My own opinion of Mr. Yousaf is largely neutral. He is a relatively effective leader of the SNP and a relatively effective First Minister. I don't see any particular issues with that. Although his latest hate crime legislation, which is about to become law in Scotland on April the 1st, has attracted the attention of the unionist media today, who've said that a great deal of police time might be wasted trying to figure out whether something someone said was offensive or abusive or threatening, and whether that constituted a hate crime or not. Now, frankly, I think this is Professor Tompkins, who is obviously another Tory and an expert in law, apparently, at Glasgow University, stirring the pot a bit here. He's trying to make it seem as though the hate crime bill is going to waste police time. It's not going to waste police time if it's used properly. Anybody who is a target of hate crime, if they were to wear, for example, a body camera or to record audio of any of these hate crimes, then that would be evidence, and that's something which the police would not have to figure out. They wouldn't have to waste time on it at all. And in fact, the more people who are subjected to hate crimes start to take action to record those who are perpetrating it, the more likely it is that the hate crime bill will actually work. So Tompkins, I think, is again stirring it a bit against Mr. Yousaf, because it was his hate crime bill and it had a difficult passage through Holyrood in the first place. But I think the hate crime bill is a good idea, and I think the definition of hate crime, which has been changed as a result of this legislation, shouldn't give the police any great worries. The police know how to apply the law, and when someone has been abused racially, when they've been threatened, when they have been harassed in the street, it's obvious. It's not a difficult situation for the police to figure out. So Tompkins, I think, is just at it. Anyway, that's about it from IndyCar today. I hope you've enjoyed today's programme. Still as a live stream. It's possible that I will continue to make recorded programmes and post them online, but I have my doubts now about the effectiveness of Facebook as a place to make live streams. If you are watching this programme, and I hope you still are after watching it all the way through, please share it, and share it everywhere you can. Share it to every single friend you've got on your friends list on Facebook, and make sure it gets as much exposure as possible. Create a link to the show, share that on other social media platforms as well, and encourage all your friends and all other independent supporters to do the same thing. Facebook is going to try and limit my exposure here to the minimum, but as long as I'm recording these programs here, my YouTube video uploader and my editor will still post them to YouTube, and they are attracting thousands of views there as well. So for the time being, I'm going to continue with live streams until we figure out a better way of doing this. Right at the moment, I would say that social media is now being heavily censored, filtered, subject to algorithms which are basically returning social media back to what it was, which is people's lives, individuals' little adventures during the day, what kind of food they ate, fluffy kittens, animals doing funny things. It's going to be dumbed back down to being the kind of social media it started out being. Political discourse is going to be heavily censored, restricted, and eventually squeezed out. So I think Facebook's, its days are numbered when it comes to political shows like this. So I will be changing the format gradually, but I'll still post some regular stuff online live as I'm doing now. In the meantime, as I always say, keep the faith. Remember, things will change. I suspect that things will really change when we get a change of leadership in the SNP at Holyrood, and that's going to have to wait until 2026. What happens in Westminster is largely irrelevant. It is a parliamentary election for London, and we cannot operate there. We have less than 8% of the available MPs there. We can't affect any decisions made by Westminster. All we can do is shout a lot, make a bit of noise, and suffer the mocking and the jeering of all the Tories and the Labour frontbenchers. So that'll continue, no matter what we vote. So I would say to you, if you're planning to vote SNP in the next general election, that's fine. If you're planning to vote for the Greens or someone else, also fine. It's not going to make a huge difference. The only difference that might be made is if a few people abandon the SNP and they start to lose seats. In that instance, maybe, just maybe, the SNP's upper echelons will realise that they are losing the support of their base. And if they do that, if they're silly enough to do that and take it for granted, they will go the same way as the Labour Party has done in Scotland, and some new party will step in to take up the role of the independence movement. And that's a danger for any political party. Never take the electorate for granted. Anyway, I'll leave you on that note. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back later in the week. Bye for now.